Welcome. I'm your host, Christina Haskin, and tonight my guest is Felicia Klliment. She's a nutritionist counselor, and she was a professor at City College in New York City, and she's also the author of a wonderful book, The Acid Alkaline Balanced Diet.
If you're let's say you have excess acid, and I'll give you an example of that. I'll tell you about Carolyn. She was adopted from a Korean orphanage by Finnish parents. She was raised in Germany. As an adult, she became a pianist. She'd go to different festivals all over Europe and perform. She was in Salzburg performing at a festival. She and her husband that night went to a butcher shop and bought a steak. This butcher shop bought meat from organic farms. Well, they brought it to their apartment and they cooked the steak, and Carolyn ate the steak and immediately went into shock.
Oh my.
And her husband rushed her to the hospital where she had a steroid shot and didn't die. Without it, she would have. I don't like steroids, but in this case, it was okay. Now, what happened? Why did this happen to Carolyn? Well, she had, it turned out, huge levels of hydrochloric acid in her stomach. The steak had been preserved with vitamin C, which of course is also acid. So that acid, her acid level went just over the top, and there was so much acid that her blood just couldn't handle it.
So if you get to have way too much acid, it can get dangerous, or is it?
It can get dangerous. Now you can say if you have too much alkaline foods, can it get dangerous? Well, for some reason we all tend to be too acidic, because acidic is from not only inappropriate foods that you eat that don't go with your particular metabolism, but we all of us eat some junk food and processed foods, and all of these degenerate into acid waste. So that's why we're too acidic. I mean, and a lot of authors recommend eating a lot of green leafy vegetables because they're very alkaline. But the point is, if you're a meat eater, you can't eat a whole lot of green leafy vegetables. If you're a grain eater, you can. So, you know, what's healthy for one person isn't necessarily healthy for another.
So say you find out that you're a meat eater, then you adjust your diet, and then you test with these strips, or how do you test?
You can retest yourself with the niacin.
Uh-huh.
You know, and people change their metabolic types. You could be a meat eater at one stage in your life and a grain eater at another.
But I mean, if you're eating the proper diet, then can you test to see if it's changed your acidity thing, that it's...
Oh, the pH balance.
That it's, yeah, that your body's happier with what's happening.
Well, yeah, you can test your urine, you can test your saliva.
Uh-huh.
The trouble is with testing your urine is that the urine is sometimes normally acid and other times slightly alkaline. I mean, it's just a natural cycle with the urine. So actually a saliva test would be better.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And as far as the scary thing, everybody's worried about cancer, how do the acid waste affect something like that?
Actually, that's a good question. Acid waste destroys oxygen. The other, which is, oxygen is a cancer preventer. The other thing is that a lot of acid waste in the blood thickens the blood. As a result of the thickened blood, the blood can't transport enough nutrients and oxygen to the cells. Well, what do the cells do that aren't getting enough oxygen, for instance? They're malnourished. They either die out or they adapt. And they adapt by producing energy without oxygen, because they don't have any oxygen. They produce it anaerobically. And what does that mean? It means they become cancer cells, because cancer cells don't use oxygen to produce energy. Oh. So that's a scary thing about thickened blood, that you have a lot of malnourished cells that die out. Better that they die out than they become malignant.
Right. So if you've been eating, like I remember in your book there was a story about a boy who had drunk soda for eons, and
Jose, yeah,
and had a lot of stuff going on even though he was young, and
well, let me tell you,
he made a good recovery. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Jose and his family were from Peru. They were of Indian stock, and they moved to the United States, to California, when he was a little boy, and he started drinking soda, 6 to 8 bottles of Coke, at the age of 5. And he also ate a lot of junk food. Well, when he became a teenager, about the age of 16, he got bad pains in his stomach. The doctors couldn't decide whether it was from his appendix or his gallbladder, so they removed both, which of course is a terrible thing to do, the appendix being part of the immune system, and the gallbladder necessary for good digestion. Well, shortly after, he got lupus. And the lupus was very serious. It wasn't just a skin thing, it was internal. It got so bad that his immune cells were taking big bites out of his kidneys, and his kidneys were leaking blood. His urine was bloody, it was brown. His ankle swelled up like this, and he started losing weight. By the time I got to him, he was really dying. He was skin and bones, and I won't go into all the symptoms that he had. Well, I put him on the traditional diet of his ancestors. I started him out on potato soup and pumpkin soup for a couple of weeks, and then I added the brown rice, which his ancestors also ate. And within a few weeks, he just blossomed. I mean, he started gaining weight. I mean, within 2 weeks, you knew that he was certainly not going to die.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he's now, he was a teenager. He's now 25, and he lives in London and visits me once a year, and he's in very good shape.
Does he still eat, have to eat very restricted?
He still watches his diet, not as much as I'd like him to. Yeah.
That's an amazing story.
I also gave him 1,600 units of vitamin E, which is a large amount, but vitamin E is so good for the kidneys that I had to throw that in after he'd been on this traditional diet for a few weeks.
So do you have people coming to you who have tried other things and they don't know what's going on with them, and you find that situations like that?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I have. When I test them, metabolically test them with the niacin, and try to get them on the appropriate diet. Now, of course, there are many gradations of meat eater and grain eater, and I have to kind of work with them for a while to find out. Some meat eaters need to eat meat 5 times a week, others 3 times a week. The other thing about the diet is that a meat eater doesn't give up the foods that the grain eater eats. The meat eater and the grain eater doesn't give up meat. It's just the proportion is different. The meat eater eats more meat and less grains and fish and chicken, and the grain eater eats more grains, fish, and chicken, and less meat.
And is there somebody that is both, or?
Okay, there are a few lucky people who have a balanced metabolism, and they can eat anything, and they should eat. They should eat meat, grains, fish. They should eat the whole range to keep their metabolism in balance. Yeah.
So if somebody does the niacin test themselves, do they have to double check that? I mean, it seems like it's a very simple test. It would.
Well,
and yet it has a great importance in a certain.
It is. First of all, they can do it. I think they should do it periodically. Second, they can also use vitamin C. And why niacin and vitamin C? Because they're acid. And that's why when you use one of the or other of the tests or both, you're getting an idea of how much hydrochloric acid you have in your stomach. Because that's, digestion of protein is really the key thing.